the Victorian High Country. It is one of Australia's last great wildernesses, a place of staggering beauty, of rugged isolation, where the mountains keep silent watch over valleys carved by time. For generations, it's been a refuge for campers, hikers, and hunters, a place to escape. But in March 2020, this beautiful, silent landscape became the setting for a crime so cold, so methodical, that it would shock the nation. 2 elderly lovers went missing. Their campsite was found destroyed by fire. But the flames couldn't hide the truth. They were hiding something far more sinister. When 2 experienced campers vanish from Victoria's remote Wonnangatta Valley, police initially suspect a tragic accident. Russell Hill, 74, and Carol Clay, 73, were on a secret getaway. Their friends and family were worried, but the bush can be a dangerous place. But when investigators arrived at their camp, the scene told a different story. Not one of accident, but of violence. A meticulously burned campsite, a locked car, and 2 people who had vanished into thin air. It would spark one of Australia's most complex and expensive murder investigations. A 20-month-long hunt for a ghost. A killer who was hiding in plain sight. A respected airline pilot. This is a story of a secret love, a deadly confrontation over a tiny drone, and a calculated cover-up so thorough, it involved burning and scattering the victims' remains across the mountains, leaving investigators with nothing but 2,100 fragments of bone. At 74, Russell Hill was the quintessential Australian bushman, a retired logger. He knew the high country like the back of his hand. His family had even helped build some of the tracks that snaked through the Wonnangatta. He wasn't just a camper. He was a survivor, a wilderness expert. Russell was tough, robust, and respected. His passion was amateur radio. Every night, he'd be on the airwaves, chatting with a tight-knit community of friends, his voice crackling across the remote valleys. He'd also embraced new technology. His latest obsession was a drone, a DJI Mavic, which he used to capture stunning aerial footage of the landscapes he loved so much. A hobby that, tragically, may have sealed his fate. But Russell's life was complex. He was a loving patriarch, married to his wife Robin for over 50 years. Yet, for nearly 2 decades, he held a secret. He was in love with another woman. That woman was 73-year-old Carol Clay. If Russell was the quiet bushman, Carol was a pillar of the community, a devoted mother and grandmother. She was the former state president of the Country Women's Association of Victoria. She was known for her legendary baking, her administrative skills, and her tireless work for charities like Food Bank. She was a woman who had dedicated her life to serving others. She and Russell were teenage sweethearts. Their young love was interrupted by the demands of life, marriage, careers, and raising families. But in the mid-2000s, they reconnected. That old spark was still there. Carol had even divorced her second husband, believing she and Russell would one day build a life together. But Russell couldn't bring himself to leave his wife. So Carol found herself in the complicated, often painful, position of being the lifelong mistress. Their camping trips were their escape, their secret world. In the remote wilderness, they didn't have to hide. They could just be Russell and Carol. For their final trip, Russell had told his wife he was going alone, as he often did. It was the cover story that had worked for years. On March 19, 2020, Russell picked up Carol. They drove deep into the high country, setting up their camp in a secluded spot called Buck's Camp. They had their solar panels, Russell's radio gear, and his prized drone. They were planning to stay for a week. The next evening, March 20th, Russell Hill did what he always did. He switched on his high-frequency radio for his nightly check-in. That conversation with his friend, Rob Ashlin, ended at 6:40 p.m. It was the last time anyone would ever hear Russell Hill's voice. The next night, March 21st, the airwaves were silent. Russell missed his check-in, and the night after that. For his radio friends, this was a massive red flag. Russell was never late. He was meticulous. Rob Ashlin, fearing the worst, advised Russell's wife to call the police. On March 26th, police reached Buck's Camp. What they found was deeply disturbing. The campsite was a blackened scar on the landscape. The tent, the chairs, their gear, all destroyed by an intense fire. Russell's Land Cruiser was still there, locked and oddly, almost untouched by the fire, save for a few scorch marks. Inside, in the footwells, police found Russell and Carol's wallets. Their IDs were there, but their mobile phones were gone. And so was Russell's expensive drone. This wasn't an accident. An accidental fire wouldn't be this thorough, and it wouldn't explain the locked car or the missing items. Robbery? Perhaps. But why leave the wallets? No, this was something else. This was staged. Russell Hill and Carol Clay had been murdered. The question was, by who? And where were their bodies? The search for Russell and Carol became one of the biggest in Victoria's history. But the High Country is a vast, unforgiving place. Weeks turned into months. The trail went cold. The public speculated. Was it an accidental shooting by a deer hunter? Had they stumbled onto something they shouldn't have? Investigators were stumped, until a tiny digital breadcrumb gave them their first break. On the morning of March 21st, the day after their last radio call, Russell Hill's mobile phone briefly reconnected to a cell tower. It pinged near Mount Hotham, a ski resort area miles away from Buck's camp. This was impossible. Russell was missing. His phone should be a burned piece of plastic at the campsite. This meant one thing. The killer had taken the phone. And on that morning, the killer was driving, with Russell's phone in their car, past Mount Hotham. Detective Sergeant Brett Florence and his team now had a time frame and a location. They turned to the automated number plate recognition, ANPR, cameras on the roads leading to the mountain. They painstakingly cross-referenced the exact time of the phone ping with the camera footage. 12 vehicles had passed through the area in that critical window. They eliminated them one by one. 11 of the vehicles had innocent reasons for being there. Only one matched the precise route and time, traveling from the Wonnangatta Valley to Mount Hotham. A dark Nissan Patrol, towing a trailer, driven by a single man. A check of the registration revealed the driver, Gregory Stuart Lynn, a 57-year-old former Jetstar pilot. He was an amateur deer hunter who knew the High Country. Suddenly, police had their first and only person of interest. But they needed more than a car sighting. Victoria Police launched one of the most extensive surveillance operations in its history. For nearly a year, they watched Greg Lynn. They put listening devices in his home, in his car, and even at campsites he visited. They recorded over 5,000 conversations. They heard him talking to himself, muttering incriminating details about the deaths. Details only the killer could know. They put a tracker on his car, and what they saw confirmed their fears. In June 2020, just months after the murders, Lynn repainted his Nissan Patrol, changing it from its original dark color to beige. He'd also tried to sell the trailer he used to tow something out of the valley. He was actively destroying evidence. The surveillance and Lynn's own intercepted conversations finally led police to a remote, blackened patch of bushland on a lonely track called Union Spur. What they found here was a scene of pure horror. Lynn had returned. Long after the murders, he had come back to this spot where he'd first dumped the bodies, and he had burned them. Again and again. He had systematically pulverized and incinerated their remains to obliterate every trace. Led by forensic anthropologist George Zidias, the team sifted through the soil, recovering over 2,100 bone fragments, most smaller than a fingernail. The DNA lab worked a miracle. They got a match. The fragments at Union Spur belonged to Russell Hill. But where was Carol? In a shocking twist, investigators re-examined the original Buck's campsite. Tucked away, they found tiny fragments of cranial bone. The DNA confirmed it. They belonged to Carol Clay. This was the key. Lynn hadn't just killed them. He had killed Carol at the campsite and Russell somewhere. He had then transported Russell's body miles away to Union Spur, burned it, and then returned to the original campsite to meticulously clean up, missing only the smallest fragments of Carol's skull. The level of calculation was chilling. At Lynn's home, police found the final piece, a 12-gauge Barathrum arms shotgun, the weapon they believed that had started it all. So who was Gregory Stuart Lynn? On the surface, he was the image of middle-class success, a respected Jetstar captain, a family man with a loving wife and son, living on a substantial estate. But beneath this polished facade was a history of failure, anger, and darkness. In 1986, Lynn joined the RAF with dreams of being a fighter pilot. He failed. He was scrubbed from the program for, quote, personal qualities, a military euphemism for being psychologically or behaviorally unsuitable. He moved to commercial aviation, but the red flags followed him. Colleagues at ANSET and Jetstar later described disturbing behavior. They said he would lose his temper over trivial matters, slamming his fists on tables. One called him just an all-out weird unit. Several refused to fly with him, citing his mental instability. But the most chilling part of Lynn's past was his first marriage. His wife, Lisa Lynn, lived in terror of him. Her own mother would later testify that Greg subjected Lisa to physical and mental abuse on a frequent basis. She described him killing animals and pushing her around. In 1999, Lisa Lynn was found dead on the front lawn of her home. She had consumed a lethal mix of alcohol and antidepressants. The coroner ruled it a suicide, but her family never believed it. Her diary documented abusive threats and phone calls that left her petrified. Her mother told the inquest, "As far as I'm concerned, Greg is responsible for my daughter's death by mental torture." This was the man camping just 100 meters from Russell Hill and Carol Clay, a man with a history of rage, a man who, when confronted, was allegedly prone to violence, and a man whose professional training as a pilot, in navigation, planning, and methodical procedure, gave him the exact skills he would need to execute a near-perfect cover-up. The trial of Greg Lynn began in May 2024. It was one of the most anticipated trials in Australian history. But the prosecution had a massive problem. Lynn had confessed to police during a high-pressure, 4-day interrogation. But in a pre-trial ruling, Justice Michael Croucher threw most of it out. He called the police tactics a withering barrage of oppressive and improper inducements, designed to break Lynn's right to silence. This left the prosecutor, Daniel Porcetu, with a case built almost entirely on circumstantial evidence. He had no bodies, no eyewitnesses, and a crime scene that had been scrubbed and burned. His entire case rested on one powerful idea: consciousness of guilt. The prosecution argued that no innocent person would engage in such an elaborate, systematic, 20-month-long cover-up. The sheer methodical effort to destroy every trace of Russell and Carol proved he was guilty of murder, not a tragic accident. Their theory is a dispute over Russell's drone led Lynn to kill Hill first, and then execute Carol Clay because she was a witness. Then, in a stunning gamble, the defense did the one thing that could save or doom their client. Greg Lynn took the stand to tell his story. He looked at the jury and he told them what happened. He claimed Russell Hill confronted him about deer hunting, threatening to show police drone footage of him hunting too close to the camp. Lynn claimed Hill stole his shotgun. A struggle began. Lynn said he was trying to get the gun back when it accidentally went off, firing over the bonnet of Hill's car and hitting Carol Clay in the head, killing her instantly. He then claimed a distraught and enraged Russell Hill attacked him with a knife. A second struggle ensued, and in the chaos, Lynn claimed Hill fell onto his own knife, stabbing himself in the chest. 2 deaths, 2 struggles, 2 tragic accidents, all within minutes. His defense barrister, Dermot Dan, argued that Lynn then panicked. He feared no one would ever believe this incredible story. His life as a pilot, his family, it would all be over, so he erased them. The jury was left with an impossible choice: a cold-blooded, calculated murderer, or the unluckiest man in the world who panicked and made horrific decisions. For 7 long days, they deliberated. The verdict stunned the courtroom. For the murder of Russell Hill, not guilty. The jury accepted there was enough doubt about a fatal struggle. But for the murder of Carol Clay, guilty. The split verdict was confusing. How could he be guilty of one murder, but not the other, in a 2-person struggle? The jury likely believed the ballistics evidence. The shotgun, with its stiff trigger, was unlikely to go off accidentally in the way Lynn described. They believed he had deliberately and with murderous intent shot Carol Clay. At the sentencing, Carol's daughter, Emma Davies, faced her mother's killer. In a powerful victim impact statement, she refused to say his name. "He," she said, "destroyed my mother. He burnt her beyond all possible recognition. The verdict brought a fractured, incomplete justice. Russell Hill's widow, Robin, said she had received the wrong result. For her, the man who killed her husband was acquitted of his murder. The pain for both families was compounded by Lynn's horrific cover-up. The desecration of their loved ones' bodies was a second, profound trauma. In the wake of the conviction, Victoria police made a stunning announcement. They were officially reviewing the 1999 death of Greg Lynn's first wife, Lisa. The mental torture her family spoke of 2 decades ago now casts a much darker, more sinister shadow. And what about the High Country itself? Russell and Carol were not the only ones to vanish. At least 4 other people have disappeared without a trace in that same region. Police have found no evidence linking Lynn to them, but the questions linger. The case has left a scar on the land, a place of beauty now tinged with fear. The case leaves behind a legacy of unanswered questions. What really happened in those fatal minutes at Buck's camp? What was the true sequence of events? And how does a respected airline pilot become a brutal killer, capable of destroying 2 human beings, and then calmly going back to work? The High Country Murders is a story of a secret love affair that ended in a dark, remote valley. It's a story of a chance encounter with a man who harbored a dark side, a man who, when confronted, unleashed unimaginable violence. And it's a story of a near-perfect cover-up, a 20-month-long lie that was only unraveled by a single fleeting phone ping, and the relentless detectives who followed its digital trail. The split verdict means that, in the eyes of the law, the full truth of what happened at Buck's camp remains a mystery. Greg Lynn has lodged an appeal, maintaining his innocence. But for the families of Russell Hill and Carol Clay, the long wait for justice is, in some small way, finally over. The jury's split verdict was one of the most controversial in recent history. What do you make of their decision? Do you believe Greg Lynn's story of 2 tragic accidents, or the prosecution's case of a cold-blooded double murder? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. And for more deep-dive investigations into the world's most complex true crime cases, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. Thank you for watching. Take care, and see you next time.